Hello, welcome back. My name is Steve, and I'm creating a racing game in Unity. So this is my devlog series where I share that process with you. I'm going to show you what I set up today, and then we're going to take a look at the racing system, a little deep dive under the hood. Let's go ahead and create a new character profile. We'll select level 1 option 1, and you can see that we have a nicer looking loading screen. I took the logo that I created yesterday and put it in the center of the screen and moved the text. I think it looks more interesting like that now. Definitely better than just a black screen. Someone also brought up the fact that when I drive into an event, the event is auto-loaded. So what I did this time is I set up on trigger enter and exit. So on trigger enter will drop in a window and it'll say the name of the event. So this event's name will be called skill check. It's basically the first event of the game. And it says, are you ready to start the event? And you could press start event if you are, or you could drive away and do something else if you don't want to start the event yet. Yeah, so let's just go in and start the event. And then we could take a look at the racing system a little bit. So I haven't really done much more work. So there is a bug here. Obviously, we could see it saying that the game is paused, and we have that menu open up. Yeah, I gotta play with that pause menu a little bit. So some of the things that I added to this menu, you might notice that the profile name that we selected is in the top left, and we have our playtime right below that, 1 minute and 4.964 seconds. So if I unpause it and leave it run for a few seconds, we could just see it incremented to 1.79 seconds, 1.85 or 825 seconds. And then in the top right, it says level 1 option 1. So that should actually be changed to instead of using that generic string that says level 1 option 1, it says that because this is the first level event of the game. And we chose button option 1 in the start menu after we created our character profile. So that should probably be changed to skill check. I should actually use the event names now and create unique names for each event. And then we also have the percentage complete. A goal for this menu is to set, this is all placeholder right now still. I need to bring in some options and allow you to navigate to different menus. Yeah, basically all of the game options need to go into that menu in some way. I also had some other feedback. Someone said that when you drive into a checkpoint and it turns red, they feel like they did something wrong. And I totally get that. There is this concept that color is a language, and I do believe that using color effectively can go a long way. So when I get the chance, I'll probably spend some more time thinking about what I actually want to do with the actual color patterns. But for right now, I'm just going to leave it how it is. So that's about it. At this point, those are the changes and the feedback that I've received. So a question that I had was about the racing system. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into that racing system a little bit. If you're not interested in code or logic, you can skip past this, but this is actually pretty cool. So this is how the racing system works. I have a race manager, and there's really not much public information in the inspector. So make sure you can see that. Yeah. I'll go ahead and turn on debug mode. And what we can see here is we basically have this list of racer information. So we have Street King and QWERTYU which is the player. And the way this system works is there's a race data scriptable object. And this race data scriptable object is responsible for all of the settings that get loaded into the race. So for example, the most important information is the racer info. And this is just an array where I can provide a name and a vehicle prefab. And if I check the option for player, I don't need to supply a vehicle prefab because there's a vehicle manager system. So if it's a player object, it's just going to load the currently selected player vehicle. But I can specify any unique AI prefab, and I could increase the amount of racers in this array, and more racers will spawn into the scene. I could set all kinds of other settings, like pre-race time, number of laps, basically anything I want. When the race is initialized, it gets its data from these race data scriptable objects. So when I'm ready to create more races, I'm just going to duplicate this profile and set it up with the data I need to initialize the race the way that I need it to be. The player vehicles scriptable object, I guess that doesn't really need to be on debug. It's a little cleaner if it's not. The player vehicles just holds the same concept. It's an array, and it's going to hold a reference to all of the player vehicles. And I could set up a UI system to call a few different methods. Yeah, so I have some of them in the context menu, select next vehicle, select previous vehicle. I would basically just hook some UI pieces up to those, and then I could create a vehicle selection system, which I'm thinking about doing. So when you start the game, that's when you'll pick your vehicle, and that's the vehicle you would use throughout the game. At least for the main game mode, the first concept that I'm thinking about, that's the way that I would approach it. I don't think there's going to be a currency system, so I don't need to use price. We could name the vehicles and set the top speed, and set if the vehicle is owned or not. So maybe as the player progresses through the game, and completes certain things, they unlock new playable vehicles. That's something I could do with the current setup. So those are the two main data objects that are responsible for loading the race content. The other, so the main controller is this race manager. Let's go ahead and find it wherever it is. Here we go. So I'll basically just run down what this race manager does. Then well, actually, before I jump into it, let's take another look at the inspector in debug mode. So we basically, as the race starts, we populate the racer information as we spawn the racers, and we assign all the references that we need. So, for example, I have a name of the racer. I have a reference to its actual game object. Keeping track of its position, lap, whether or not it finished the race. The AI racer did finish the race. The player, which is me, did not. Keeping track of final standings and finish time, and also the current race waypoint, which is actually just a class, and in that class I hold references to its material, for instance, and that's how I change the material when the player reaches that waypoint. I could change the color. Anything I might want to do after a player hits a waypoint, I could set up on this script, and I have direct reference to that waypoint class for every waypoint that I'm at. So that's an easy way for me to be able to trigger different events, and basically just scale up functionality in just about any way I need to. I also have a reference to the previous waypoint, and then we have some more information. I don't think that value is actually used. Next WP, it says 0. Yeah, it is used. So that's the next waypoint index in the array. So that player completed the race. So that's why the AI is at 0. Now, the actual position calculation, this is where it gets interesting. So I have a checkpoint distance. That's the distance I am from the current waypoint, which is, yeah. So we have the checkpoint distance, a position score, a distance score, and then a total score. So that being said, let's just go ahead and take a look at the code. Let's try to make this a little bigger so we could read it. So when the race starts, that's when load data is called, and the race data scriptable object is just passed in, and that ends up going into the initialize race coroutine, which is basically just making sure race data is loaded. This is all going to change a little bit. Most of this was set up for the template where it could be done in multiple different ways. Anyway, it doesn't need to be this complex the way that I'm using it, is all that I'm getting at. So we jump into this initialize race coroutine, and it basically does some logic checks, and then it calls the setup race method. And at that point, we're basically iterating through a runtime racer info array, which is basically the race data racer info, which goes straight back to this race data. So we're just iterating through the number of racers that we have in our race data list, and we go through and we assign all of their data, and we check if it's a player, and if it's a player we assign it a certain way, and if not, it's assigned a different way if it's an AI. They have slightly different components, and just they need to be handled differently. So that's how I do that. So after the racer information list is populated, we jump into the start game coroutine, and that is basically just setting up the game time. So we set up a pre-race time, and that's how much time is active before the race. So if I set 10 seconds, 10 seconds will pass before the race actually starts. And I could do like some fancy camera work or UI stuff during that time. And once it starts counting down and it gets to 0, then the race actually starts, and it just initializes like basically all of the AI we pass control to them so they can go, and the player's allowed to drive as well. In update, I'm literally just calculating game time. That's it. Pretty simple there. And then I have this position calculation method, which let me try to get it all on screen. So it's not super complicated, but it's actually just a coroutine that's constantly running after all of the racer information is brought into the scene. And what it does is it's probably a little unoptimized. I didn't try to make this perfect. So if you're a good programmer, don't really judge me, because yeah, to me it's more important that you get something to work and you're making progress every day. I don't actually focus on writing perfect code. I did that for a while and tried to just write really good code, but you don't make great progress, and you kind of just get stuck in a place where if you want to make a game and you're focused on writing perfect code, you write code that you're spending all this time writing perfect code that you get to a point where you're not making progress, like development progress. And I think making development progress is the most important thing. Optimization is also very important, but there's always a time for it. And I think that's where project iterations come in. So that being said, I do have a bunch of for loops, and I know this is not as optimized as it could be. But basically what I'm doing is I'll go through and I'll iterate through each racer information element, and I'll calculate the checkpoint distance for that racer. Basically the vector 3 distance from the racer's transform position to the waypoint's transform position. And then I assign that distance, and I multiply it by this value. I forget why I did that. I think just so I had more specific values for the racer. I don't really remember why I'm multiplying by that. So after I get the distance, I calculate a distance score, and I make that distance score negative because that's going to be subtracted from your score. So if you're literally right next to the waypoint and your distance is 0.1, you're going to subtract that from your distance. So you would have a lower score. The players with the higher score will be higher ranked in the rankings. That's the concept. So basically, yeah, I'll explain a little bit more in a second. So the total score is basically the racer's position score plus the distance score. And the position score is not actually calculated in this position calculation. It's actually calculated in change target. So every time a racer hits a race waypoint, they basically send their racer number, index number, and the race waypoint number. And that's used to basically update the position score and set a new waypoint for that racer object. That's basically all the change target is doing. It's also checking the laps and seeing if the player finished the race, and it would go on and call those methods if it did. So yeah, every time you hit a waypoint, you get a position score, and I basically give you 2 points for every waypoint you reach, and then the distance score is subtracted from that in a sense. And then from there, I'm just sorting the arrays and the lists, and that's about it. I explain the change target, and we have a race completed callback for the player that we could basically pass whatever events in there when the player creates the race. And then I have some editor helper functions, but that's basically the racing system and how the logic works. Not sure if it'll help anybody if you're creating a racing game, but the basic idea was that you use a position score and you get points for each waypoint you reach, and you're subtracting an amount based on the distance to the current waypoint, and then you just sort the racers based on that amount. My dog is snorting at me right now because he wants another treat, so I'm not sure if you hear that. But I don't think that I'm going to do a tutorial for a race system. I think that is pretty involved, and as you can see, like I'd have to go through and set up. It would probably be hours, like an hour long or 2 hour long tutorial, and I just don't have the time for that. But hopefully me explaining to you how I wrote this racing system and how I use it, maybe that'll help you with your game. That being said, yeah, that's about it. Thanks for checking out this video. I'll see you in the next one.